Hola amigos and amigas, my name is host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Fence People. I'm here with my beloved, darling wife, Rachel. And I want to talk about this whole systems thing in a way that I get across what I'm saying quickly, succinctly. You can respond however you see fit, agree or disagree or whatever. The reason I'm saying that there's a right and a wrong way to talk, or a single right way to talk about cognitive functions, is because there's a general attempt by personality types to establish why it is that certain people share certain basic affinities towards things and such in life that are very similar to others, but concurrently very dissimilar to still others, you know? In other words, what's observed as obvious to a lot of people is some people like to talk a lot and some people like to talk a little. So what is that? Why is that the case? There are a lot of possible answers, right? It could be, well, it's how they were raised, or it could be, it's whether they're in a work situation that rewards them for talking a lot, for example. It could be like a behaviorist thing. It could be, you could have explanations that say, well, if you're born with a larger part of meow brain, then it makes you talk a lot, and if it's smaller, you talk less, or vice versa. Born with a larger part of meow brain makes you talk less because you're more deliberative and thinking about it. Anyway, the point is, there's an attempt to explain, when we're talking about personality, what aspects of the way that people stay the same throughout their lives are commonalities that other individuals share. And if we find that there are commonalities, what's the mechanism behind it, and what are the relationships between those mechanisms? So in the next couple of minutes, I want to spend time quickly articulating a bunch of definitional stuff and framework stuff, basically, that will lay out for you the case that I'm making. Remember, all this is predicated on the notion of if we define terms the way I'm saying we should define them. The purpose of this is to produce a model of human attention that when we plug things into the model's ideas, that we've come out with results that look like actual reality. So, and when we plug things in seeking an explanation, it provides an explanation that's satisfactory and withstands scrutiny automatically without you having to doctor it up a bunch, right? It's another way to consider it. So here's some definitions and stuff just to lay out the gist of it. First of all, we need to define an intentional manner. First of all, we need to define a personality type as in terms of something else. So what that means is we define it as a configuration that's a strategy of closing the gap between expectations and realities. And the reason we define it as that is because that's the prime directive. That is to say, the one common drive that seems unbreakable and underlying every single human being in the world is that they want their expectations and their realities to mostly align. People don't like to be randomly surprised by shit. And whether or not you feel sad or bad or disappointed or whatever, it really all depends on what you expected. So if you get 4th place and you expected 3rd place, you are unhappy. If you get 4th place and you expected 10th place, you're happy. So the thing is, this in general is true through all things in life, that people need to close the gap between expectations and reality. So that's that prime directive. If we accept that as, in fact, the prime directive, if and only if, okay, forget the fact that you don't have to agree with that for a second, but if we were to accept that that's the case, then a cognitive function configuration would be a personality type, and it would be a strategy towards closing the gap between expectations and realities, which would mean operationally that anytime you talk about a type or any behavior of the type, you can convert your expression of it from cognitive functions into the general units of closing the gap between expectations and reality. In other words, if a cognitive function or a type would not seem to manifest in a way that allows it to affirm under that prime directive, then we would conclude that it wasn't adequate as a prime directive. Alright, so then we define cognitive function itself as a way of paying attention in an attentional manner, which is to say a possible approach towards the world. And in parsing out that, we determined that basically, grammatically at least, we've got two distinct roles for things, that is to say subjects and objects, but conceptually we have a third, which is agent. So it's possible for Jody to kick Bob, but it's also possible for me to watch Jody kick Bob. So keeping in mind that there's existing grammatical dichotomies and trichotomies drawn here that express the possible ways that which we look at something. So then, given that we're talking about subjects, objects, and agents, in terms of perspectives, then an attentional manner should be able to express from any of those angles. And how else do we know it's an attentional manner? Well, it should be able to be understood as the willful application of your conscious self towards a given thing. Now, that's harder to understand the willfulness of something like introverted intuition than it is to understand the willfulness of something like extroverted sensing, because introverted intuition is willfully allowing, receiving, waiting for things to land on it. So it's like, just because let's say a Venus flytrap doesn't close till the fly's way down in there, doesn't mean it's not doing anything or manifesting any attention before it closes. It's just waiting for the right moment to close, right? That's still paying attention in a willful and active way. So the thing is, if we understand attention then as that which we can describe a conscious being as attending to, and we were to list a whole bunch of instances of attention, what we discover is that they fall into broad categories: knowledge, action, interfacing, and deliberation. So when we try to distinguish between what are the qualities that make sense, why do they fall into these four piles naturally, the instances, what qualifies the distinctions between instances in one pile is consistent with other instances in that pile, but inconsistent with other piles. And what we come to realize is that cognitive functions are ways of taking action, of knowing, of judging, which is to say deliberating about something, determining the statuses of something, and ways of interfacing with dynamic systems, being responsibly engaged with either other people or a unique logic to a system. So the thing is, Jung identified these things as cognitive functions. He was the one who initially brought up this idea of attentional manners. And the challenge that we have in understanding it is that attentionally, only some parties are really well designed to get conceptually what the implications of cognitive functions are. And the reason is because of cognitive functions. Certain cognitive functions see singular truths as always instrumental if they're in a certain slot, and certain ones, people with certain functions in other slots, may see it as an end in itself. This can cause a lot of conflict between people, and conflict between how you should approach a given issue. So this issue of paying attention is an issue that I know how to approach because it's an abstract conceptual model of a bunch of abstract concepts, which is to say our distinctions drawn between observed phenomena. So why then should we prefer Eric's definitions of each of the individual functions? Say TI is delivered. Well, so what we have here is extroverted intuition is an action function that acts upon the external metaphysical field. Let's say it acts in words. It acts by putting meanings out there for you to pick up and do with as you're going to do with it, okay? extroverted sensing is an action function because it deals in the currency of impacts. It changes actual realities. It follows through on what it says it's going to do and stuff like that, right? We see that introverted feeling is an interested calculus function to determine the status of things that are very complicated questions that don't have clear black and whites. And there's plenty of stuff in life that's like that. Like, how do I tell this guy that who wants to send me his poem, right? How do I tell him what I think? The reality is, what I thought was the first 2 lines of it were great, actually, and would be a great beginning to a song. And then I thought most of the rest of it was kind of okay. Yeah, like, it was pretty good. It wasn't bad. But the thing is, this guy, even though he's in his 20s and hasn't devoted himself at all to the skill of poetry writing, wants himself to already be a genius poet, you know, without knowing anything about meter or without having written a bunch of poems, without having pushed himself aesthetically, right? Like, and so when I replied, I tried to be honest and also, you know, start with the things or include things that I thought were very good about it. I don't think he appreciated my response at all, even because it also wasn't glowing or anything. I said, you know, it's better than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be horrible, frankly. But that's because I would think that about anybody who wants to send me a poem. I assume it's horrible. Very few people know how to do it well. It's a difficult thing to do. So the thing is, why did he send me that poem and stuff? And what does he want from me in return? And why is he somebody who wrote a poem instead of watching another video of mine or something? All of these things are questions answered by attentional manners, and they're not answered anywhere else in psychology. So then we're still left with the question, why do we prefer the way you're approaching it, Eric, in general, over somebody else's definitions? And the answer is, it arose by any other name as a rose. You can call T.I. Miggity Meow if you want, but regardless, there does exist a way of paying attention that calculates the legitimacy of what's being said based on consistency with other things being said, axioms, and a variety of grammatical, logical constructs. That exists in the world. It's existent. It is a form of paying attention by any meaningful definition of paying attention, which is to say, the willful application of your conscious self towards a given matter, right? So it needs to be incorporated in any attentional manner model. Now, we call it TI because that's what Jung called it, basically. This is what Jung was referring to when he talked about TI. Other people say, well, you can't call that TI. If TI were logical reasoning, then nobody without TI would be logical. Well, the reality is, in every type, you're dealing with a configural imbalance that causes you to express as a self, primarily as, I gotta go 18 first, primarily as one quote-unquote personality type, and as a consequence, not as those things that are mutually exclusive or contraindicative of the type that you are. Which is to say, I'm making this video right now because this is attentionally the thing that I have the most full access to, ideation like this. And necessarily, accordingly, I have less access to certain other ways of paying attention, or the number of angles of access that other ways of paying attention are open to me are limited by the unlimitedness of my dominant. Not a great job, but I said a whole shit ton in 15 minutes.